as part of this webinar, we'll have a short test lecture to give you an idea how a sustainability-focused lecture would look like at KLU. Obviously, a really short lecture because we're quite advanced with respect to time. And I could ramble on for days, most likely, but I won't. For this very short test lecture, I chose a rather provocative title, right? So sustainable logistics, it can't be that hard, can it? And I would be super happy if I could say, well, it really isn't hard, case closed, and end the lecture. That would be great for, well, for the sustainability of logistics, but the sad answer is that it's pretty hard. And that's why we have to deal with that and look into that. And that's why it's worthwhile to have this as a test lecture, I think. So where does sustainability come from? What's the origin? Hundreds of years, well, that's one origin. Let's start it this way. Hundreds of years ago, Germany was mostly covered with forest, with trees. It's been that way for centuries over centuries. And then starting 1650, something around that time, they started to disappear, and they disappeared for three reasons. First of all, so the first chunk of trees was cut down for military reasons, because at that time there were many small kingdoms fighting each other, and they built ships out of the trees. Second thing was it was used for the mining industry, right? To build the structure of the mines, but also to make fire, to use it under the melting furnaces, right? To get to the iron, to build weapons also. So another military reason. And then the third one is the population was growing, and people just needed more woods, more trees to heat their homes and also to cook. And during that time, a gentleman was born. His name was Hans Carl von Carlowitz. He came from a quite wealthy family, and he went to school and studied. And after that, it was tradition at the time to do a grand tour, which meant he rode his horse, not his bike, I'm sorry. He took a horse, that was the mode of transport at the time, and toured Germany and toured Europe to experience how life was in different parts of Europe. So we went to Italy and to France and all through Germany. And well, and then he noticed that forests disappeared all over Europe at an increasing rate, right? Because that was 350 years ago. There wasn't a, I don't know, forest indicator or something that you could just look up on the internet. You had to go there and experience yourself. And he came back to Saxony, that's where he came from, and became head of forestry in this kingdom at the time. And well, over time, devised some rules and guidelines how to operate forests in a sustainable way. And he wrote a book about that. It's this book that the cover that you see right beside his portrait. It was a bestseller at the time. I don't know what that means in terms of copies sold, maybe 15 or 20, I don't know. But there is a citation from his book. He essentially said that you wouldn't throw away clothing until you have new ones. So you also should not chop down too many trees when you don't have taken care of trees regrowing, right? So if you lose some trees for some reasons, because you need them for the economy or whatever, you should also make sure that they can regrow at a rate that is sufficient to keep the supply stable, right? So sustainability in its origin is essentially about sustaining the stock of natural resources. I think that's a pretty straightforward, easy, well, it's quite straightforward to understand where that comes from and what this core concept of sustainability is. that's not really a definition, but let's look at one. I mean, this is a lecture, right? And in lectures, we like to look at definitions from time to time. And this is a very well-known one from the Brundtland definition, coined in 1987. And you might have heard the sentence before, because it states that sustainability is essentially meeting the needs of the present people, right? The people around, the current generation, but without compromising the chances of future generations to meet their own needs. And this obviously applies to forestry, right? Because if the current generation, they chop down woods, trees, use them, but make sure to plant some new ones so that future generations can also use trees for their purposes. And this is also quite straightforward, I think, and well, that's a good definition. It's well known for a reason. It gets a bit more complicated when you want to look at sustainability on a global scale, right? Because just trees is not sustainability of the world, but it takes a bit more. These are 17 Sustainable Development Goals that were devised by the United Nations, and they have to be targeted simultaneously to achieve to make the world a better place, right? To achieve sustainable development globally. And well, they are quite diverse, sometimes contradictory. They are economic goals, like no poverty, and also zero hunger is related to that. There are more goals on the social side, like education, number 4, or gender equality, number 5, or also health, the third one. And then there are environmental goals, like, number 14, life below water, preserving life on land, clean water, all kinds of things that have to be tackled for a sustainable development of the world. Now, this lecture is also about logistics, right? And logistics is connected to those goals in multiple ways. Sometimes logistics is part of the solution. Sometimes logistics is part of the problem. And one goal that in relation with logistics outshines all the others is climate action. And we'll have a look into that and why that's the case now. So man-made climate change, you've probably heard about that. That is something that almost all reasonable scientists agree upon, that it's happening and that it's a problem. And one group of the population has understood that this taking care of their needs is not really focused on too much at the moment. So this is the Friday for Future protests of the younger people. Maybe you were at some of these events as well. What they do essentially is trying to hold the people in power now accountable to this sustainable development definition that I just showed you, right? Because they are pretty good in taking care of their own needs at the moment. But it seems they lose a bit the focus on making sure that the current or next generations can also meet their needs, especially with respect to climate change. So climate change means that the average temperatures are rising, right? And this is problematic in multiple ways. The sea levels might rise. We will have more extreme weather events. And when we talk about the rise of temperatures, then we compare it to the pre-industrial average. So the temperatures around 1800. And well, let's see if it's a bit of an interactive test lecture, right? We would have discussed a lot already if you would be in class, but let's try this one. So what do you think? It's about warming, right? What do you think is the scientific consensus on the temperatures, temperature increase that should not be exceeded to avoid irreversible consequences? We won't use Menti for that. It's easier if you just write that into the chat box. So A, B, C, or D, what do you think? And don't forget to send it to all panelists and attendees. So is it 3.2 or 2.0 or 1.5 or 1.0? Okay, A, C, C, okay, 2 times C, 1 times A. More ideas or opinions on that? Okay, so 2 of you are right, it's 1.5. 3.2 would be good, we'll see in a second, but it's 1.5. So, come on, this doesn't really work. Oh, there it is. Okay, so 1.5 is correct. So 1.5 degree temperature increase is the Paris Agreement goal. We should not exceed that. You could ask yourself, okay, where are we at the moment? And we are around there. So 1 degree Celsius of warming already. And you could say, okay, well, half a degree left, way to go, we're safe. We're not, because that is where we might end up with the current pledges and targets put in place by governments, and also the policies implemented. So the temperature increase will be much higher until 2100. And I'm not sure that I will be around at the time anymore, but you might be, or your kids or grandkids. So something should be done to avoid that we will end up at 3 degrees Celsius warming. Now, keep that in mind for a second, right? A quite daunting message, I think. So climate change is an issue. And now let's have a look at logistics and what that is first before we proceed. So there are, again, many different ways of defining what logistics actually is. One quite well-known definition is the 7 R's, right? And they say that logistics is the delivery of the right product to the right place, to the right price, to the right customer, in the right condition, at the right time, in the right quantity. And that is quite abstract, right? So if you want to make it more tangible, let's assume you've come to Hamburg and it's a nice summer evening and you're sitting on your balcony close to midnight. So there are not that many evenings in Hamburg where you can sit on your balcony at midnight with warm weather, but let's assume there is one. And the life is good. There's only one thing that would make your life even better now, and that is a family-sized serving of Ben & Jerry's chocolate fudge brownie. I think that's a real life situation, right? I encounter that often. So ice cream makes life always better. And if you can then go to your local gas station at midnight and find it there, the right product at the right place for the right price, quite expensive, but okay, it's midnight at a gas station, right? In the right quantity for you in a good condition, then this is the result of functional logistics, right? If you can't see it, if it's just there, the product as you want it, and you can't see what happened before, then logistics worked quite well. If you look at the industry, and not so much on a definition, then you see that transport logistics, what is needed to bring it there, is only half of the logistics industry. So there is transport, and as you can see in the picture, it's bringing parcels to your home. It's international forwarding, so overseas or through the air. It's barge transports for coal or for ore or corn or whatever. And it's overland transport, so all the trucks you see on the road. But that is only half of the industry. The other part is intralogistics, so handling of goods at terminals, at warehouses, and industrial contract logistics, which is essentially everything that happens inside of factories. Okay, so this is just a very short idea what logistics is, right? And now let's bring these two topics together. Because to link them, we can ask ourselves, so what causes climate change, right? So there is, as you might know, a natural greenhouse gas effect on the world, and that is a good thing, because without that, we wouldn't be here. It would be way too cold. And this greenhouse effect is is enabled by greenhouse gases. So they are there anyway, but the issue with climate change is that they grow. And they grow, the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere grows mainly by two sources. First of all, burning fossil energy sources, and second of all, a changed land use. Now, you could ask yourself, how is that linked now? Well, all the vehicles you've seen on the last slide, the truck, the ship, airplanes, whatever, they all burn fossil energy sources at a quite high rate. So they really contribute to the increase in greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. So they contribute, but well, how much? So what do you think? What's the share of CO2 emissions that is caused by logistics activities in relation to other sectors? So again, please use the chat box. Is it A, is it B, C, or D? What do you think? What's the size of the pie, a piece of the pie? Well, A, D, D, C, all right. So a large part, that's for sure. It is 11%, right? Around 11%. It can be, it depends on how you draw the boundaries. Sometimes it's a bit higher, sometimes it's a bit lower, but a quite large chunk. If you imagine out of the 100% that is caused by all kinds of things, by industry, by farming, by private households, logistics alone is 11%. That's quite something. And well, that's quite something, and this should be reduced because we don't want to end up at the 3°C warming as we've seen, right? And well, there are different targets set by some organizations like this one from the EU that say, well, this is where we should go in terms of emissions. And this, well, 2011 transport white paper from the EU states that we should cut the CO2 emissions from transport in Europe by 60% compared to 1990. So 60% in 60 years, right? Sounds okay, right? But let's see. What do you think? Where are we today? So this is around 2020. It's the numbers for 2018 actually, because there are no updated ones yet. But what do you think? Where are we at the moment? Are we exceeding the goals? So C or D or B? Are we on track more or less? Or are we not performing that well? So A. Okay, so 3 times A. Okay, so you are quite pessimistic. Maybe I framed that already a bit, I don't know. Actually, I fooled you a bit because all of these answers are not correct. Because this is the actual development of the CO2 emissions from transport. This looks quite sad, right? It's not closely on track. In fact, emissions from transport have grown steadily since the 1990s for a reason, because, well, logistics works so well that it's affordable to send even more stuff around on a national and a global level. And well, the transport volume grows and grows and grows, even though the individual transport vehicle gets more efficient, right? But that is the outlook at the moment where we are now. Luckily, there are things that you can do, and you can classify them in 5 fields. You could, first of all, try to reduce the level of freight movement, right? Just scale down logistics if you want, and obviously you will have lower CO2 emissions then. So we could talk about not ordering that many things online, or maybe ordering once a week and not every day. We could have more efficient routing to make the distances traveled shorter. Or, as you can see on the second picture here, 3D printing is hoped to be widely available sometime, and this might reduce the level of freight movement as well, right? Because you don't have to fly things that are produced in China to Europe, but you can just print it in your home. Not yet, but this is at least something that's on the horizon. You could shift to lower carbon modes, right? Instead of flying everything or flying things, because flying emits the most CO2 per ton kilometer, you could try to shift it to rail or to sea or whatever. And in cities, you could also exchange cars or trucks with bicycles, for example. So this is something you will see here in Hamburg quite often if you come to study here. Also, if you don't come to study, but this is something you see in big cities, at least at the moment. You could try to improve vehicle loading, right? Just put more stuff in there, use them, utilize them better. Because at the moment, just looking at trucks, around 20% of the kilometers driven by trucks are empty. So every fifth truck that you see on the Autobahn in Germany is actually empty. For many reasons, because there's no good match in supply and demand. There are startups working on that to try to better match that, to get down this number. But that is one thing that you could do there. Fourth one, you could increase efficiency. You could train the drivers better, how to drive more efficiently. That is, right, the training thing on the top, and in the bottom, another option, platooning, right? If you move the trucks closer together, they benefit from aerodynamics and use less fuel. That is something that's looked into at the moment as well. And the last one, switch to low carbon energy, right? Instead of burning fossil fuels to power the vehicles, why not use electricity and then use clean electricity to power the vehicles? So on the top, you see the semi-Tesla truck that we're all eagerly waiting for, which with a large battery. And on the bottom, you see cables on the Autobahn just like with railroads, right? To use the electricity from overland cables. And the good thing is all these options are so diverse, it takes a lot of different people and functions to really work on that. So it's not just the logistics companies, they also have to be supplied by vehicle manufacturers. We need energy supply, we need maybe behavioral research, we need regulation. So that's a good thing that many people can work on that, but that's also the bad thing that they actually have to join forces to work on that. And now coming to a close, I mean, the question now is it achievable to get there, right? I showed you this goal of the 60% reduction where we should go with logistics activities. And also where we are right now. So will we get there until 2050? The International Transport Forum did a study on that, a scenario study. They did some scenarios and calculated different outcomes. And they have one high ambition scenario where they say all these options that I just showed you, and it's dozen more, right? It was just the 5 fields and bundles of measures that you can take. If we implement everything that we can think of, we're able to cut the average carbon intensity from 24 to 9 gram CO2 per ton kilometer, right? So we would be much more efficient, use less fuel per unit. However, they also calculate that freight movement will grow a lot. They estimate it will triple by 2050. And overall, this growth in freight volume will absolutely eradicate all the efficiency savings that we will have. And they estimate that the freight emissions will grow another 20% until 2050. So they call for disruptive transformations to decarbonize freight transport by 2050. What does that actually mean? Well, it means that there's a lot of work to do. And it means that this work is to do today, but also over the next decades. And we will need many bright minds to work on this issue, and many bright minds that are that know about these things. So we essentially need you to study logistics or sustainability, right? You can also improve the system without focusing on logistics. But we need more people that care for sustainability, know about that, and work in that field. And we at, oh, that was one too quick. Oh no. I'm sorry, I messed up the sequence. So now we at KLU do research on that. We teach in this field from a variety of perspectives. And these are some examples. So it's not, when you choose to study sustainability at KLU, it's not just me that you will have to interact with. It's a range of people from different perspectives that look into how you can decarbonize the sector, but also how supply chains can become more sustainable. And if you've been at the supply chain management webinar with Sandra, you can see how these fields interact, right? Because she's actually working, she says she works in supply chain management, but also from a sustainability perspective when she looks into how food waste can be reduced. That's it. That was a short, well, not so short, but a test lecture. It would only be fair if we would have a test exam now, I think. That's not feasible, so we'll leave it at that. I hope you enjoyed it a bit. It's good to have you. And with that being said, I think I hand over to Kim again.